started. Thank you for joining us today for the SSBCI Capital Disbursement Training. As always, as we mentioned, this training will be recorded, and we will share this via our portal, and you can use this training to retrain yourself, any new members of your team. Just for the lay of the land, Raisa will provide a brief overview of our disbursement request process and some of the key areas we want you to focus on, because our goal is to make sure we expedite our review of your disbursement and have your funds in a timely manner so you can continue to run your program. Hope will walk through to demonstrate the template. She will highlight some of the best practices and some of the common areas we've seen. Hopefully you will use that to, as when you're submitting your disbursement request, you will kind of address some of those things Hope will mention. Raisa will jump back in to just detail some of the best practices and some of the supporting documentations we generally look at. Of course, none of this is comprehensive. Your program may have a different way of validating that your providers are in compliance, but we might just provide some general documentation that we have seen since we started our disbursement process. After that, we will reserve some time for the VC program, so jurisdictional VC fund program. We will reserve some time when Carl Flukes will walk you through our VC fund disbursement worksheet. That worksheet really helped us make sure that you are reporting your unobligated amounts to your VC fund correctly and reducing against any actual investment that have gone to portfolio companies. So we'll get started. We can go to the next slide, please. Okay, these are the key resources that we will highlight throughout this presentation and through our SSBCI program. So we just want to make sure that you are familiar with our policy guidelines. We have a reporting guidance, so our disbursement requests really heavily follow our reporting guidance. And we have a national compliance standards, which outlines some best practices for our program to make sure that you're in compliance with your program and various requirements. And we also have our FAQs. Those are updated more frequently, and it just provide additional clarification for our, policy. And of course, if you're for administrative expenses, we make sure that please make sure that you reference uniform cost principle to make sure your costs are aligned and compliant as outlined in the 2 CFR. We'll move on to the next slide, please. This slide just provides a status of all the disbursement compliance that's actively completed. Just if you look at the second and third tranche, as of December 31st, we've done 53 second tranche review and 10 third tranche review. As of from January last year to December last year, we've done 34. So we're very disbursement request is very important for our process, and we want to make sure we get your funds in a timely manner. This is really heavily driven by you and the documentations and your data that you provide to us. So we really do appreciate that you're taking time to be available for this training. And please do not be shy. If you have any questions, put them in the chat. Come off mute to us, any of us to stop, raise your hands. Just make sure that you are you have what you need is our goal. We can move on to the next slide, please, Raisa. Okay, so in effort to make sure you have what you need, compliance have really, since we started the disbursement process a couple of years ago, we've really continued to refine that process and work with our outreach managers, our subject matter experts, to give you tools that will expedite our review process and your document preparation process. So some of the things that we've developed is we have a pre-data validation process. So as you approach your 50% threshold, you may not be there yet. You may be approaching that based on Q4. We want you to leverage that process because they help us do a quick review of your data, give you some key points that we're seeing, so you can address those things before you do your official submission. And I'm sorry, you might hear some background noise. I have some ice cleaning services outside, so please forgive me. The next tool we've developed, which is the VC fund worksheet, the VC disbursement fund worksheet. We have those updates and training, and that's what Carl is on this call, and he will present that. So if you do have a VC fund VC fund program, approved VC fund program, we want you to leverage this as you make deals, sign commitments to VC funds, and actually start having transactions in 171 and admin costs in your VC fund. So that's what that's for. If you need a copy of that, we can provide that after this training. Raisa will send all those good materials out to you. Another file we've developed is our support documentation reference file. That file just helps jurisdictions better organize their documents and point out to specific page numbers so we can be able to confirm compliance based on what we're looking at. That has really helped, but sometimes we have some jurisdictions that may not complete it. If once you receive your sample request, that will accompany your sample request. We do ask you to please complete that, because if you don't complete it, we're just going to ask you to complete that, and it's going to hold up some time. Another tool that we've always offered in compliance is our one-on-one meetings with jurisdictions. We've worked together with our outreach team and our subject matter experts on the lending and equity side. We are available if you have any particular question and you are preparing to come for your disbursement. Please reach out to us if you have any questions or request to meet. We want to make sure that we provide the service you need so you can get the funds in a timely manner. I will stop there. I think I'm rolling it over to Raisa. Please, again, use the chat to see if you have any questions or just come off mute. Raisa, I'll turn it over to you. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Rayma. And if you can send over those ICE people to me after you're done, that'll be great. I'd appreciate it. Okay.
Okay.
All right, so let's get into how to prepare for a disbursement request. So the first thing first here is going to be, we recommend you download that template now. So this is so that when you begin filling out the template, you can begin filling out the template as you're enrolling transactions. It's going to help you keep you organized later on in the presentation. Hope is going to go through the disbursement request template, and you'll see on the cover page why it's going to be helpful for you. It'll help you track your EOT. It'll help you track your progress for your study objective, and it'll help you track your VSB allocation as well. As you're filling out your transaction detail, we also want you to review the transaction documentation. So don't just receive the transaction information and put it into the disbursement request form. Go ahead and review that documentation as you receive it. So review the supporting documentation, including certifications, to ensure completeness and compliance. Review the documentation for prohibited terms and limits for all the SSBCI program types, and also the VC fund for VC fund transactions. The VC fund worksheet will help you track the one-to-one at the fund level for each of your transactions. It'll also help you track your admin costs and your 171 contributions as well. One other reminder I want to point out here in regards to the template is that if you've recently been through a modification, just ensure that you're using the latest disbursement request form there. So if you have a program type or program name that has changed, just make sure that when you're pulling down your disbursement request template, you have the latest version with the accurate names of your programs. Okay, so how do I know if I'm eligible to receive my next tranche? So before I get into this, I also want to provide some clarification in terms, or it is related to this as well. When we say jurisdictions must expend, transfer, or obligate EOT 80% of their first tranche, that includes E, O, and T. We've seen some misconceptions that 80% has to be all expended. That's not the case. It is that jurisdictions must E, O, or T 80% of that first tranche to receive their second tranche. And to request the third tranche, the jurisdiction must EOT the 100% of the first tranche and 80% of that second tranche. So in addition to that, per our policy guidelines, jurisdictions are required to have 2 expended transactions in each active program that you will use to qualify for your 80% threshold. So maybe this is where the confusion is coming from. So let's run through this example here. Jurisdiction Z has 3 approved programs: an LPP, a CSP, and a direct equity program. So all 3 of these programs have obligated transactions, but only their LPP and direct equity have 2 expended transactions in the program. So if the transactions in Jurisdiction Z's LPP and direct equity program amount to the 80% EOT, then the jurisdiction is eligible to request their second tranche. So those expended transactions, as well as those obligated transactions in those programs, will be counted towards your 80% threshold. The reason that the obligated transactions in the CSP won't count is because they don't meet that 2 expended transaction requirement that is in our policy. So hopefully that's clear. If you have any questions, like Mayma said, jump off mute. Okay. So here, let's go through the timeline and what it's going to look like when you come in for your disbursement request. So first, you're going to submit your completed disbursement request form in the portal. So once the disbursement request form has been submitted, an email with the DocuSign of the Annex A will go to the jurisdiction's authorized official. So we've had a little bit of a change here in that. So originally, before, when jurisdictions would certify and submit in the portal, a DocuSign email would be sent immediately to the jurisdiction's authorized official. That has now changed to batched, and this cadence for the jurisdiction's authorized official receiving the DocuSign email is every 4 hours. So it's 8 a.m. Eastern, 12 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Eastern, and 8 p.m. Eastern. So for example, let's say you get onto the computer tomorrow, it's 9:30 a.m. You go into the portal, you certify and submit your disbursement request form. Your jurisdiction's authorized official is going to receive the Annex A via DocuSign at 12 p.m. Eastern. And if you don't receive it at that next interval, feel free to go ahead and reach out to us. So moving into the next box, we have data validation. So like we've mentioned previously, data validation, we're going to take your disbursement request form and we're going to run it through our system. And we're going to make sure that your disbursement request form is meeting all the SSBCI policy guidelines, all of the requirements that you should be familiar with from your application, the transaction limits, the employee limits, private capital at risk, all that good stuff. We're going to make sure that the data is accurate, and then we can move into the next section. But during this time of data validation, sometimes it can take some communication between compliance and the jurisdiction, and sometimes also require the resubmission of the disbursement request form once the data is clean. So next, into the next box, once the disbursement request form is handled, then compliance is going to select transactions from your disbursement request form to sample, and we're going to request via email supporting documentation for those transactions. So we'll review the supporting documentation and determine if the information in the supporting documentation matches what was reported on the disbursement request form. Okay, so then into the next box. As part of that review, if we have any follow-up questions or needs for clarification, that's going to be handled via meetings, via email, or via phone calls with the jurisdiction. So again, depending on the extent of the updates that are required, resubmission may also be required at this point. Once the follow-up questions have been clarified or resolved, then the disbursement request will move into final review and approval, and then funding. So again, the theme here is that the disbursement request process involves regular communication with compliance and the jurisdiction. So just be sure that you have personnel available to communicate with our team in case we need any additional information or additional documentation. That's going to be most helpful in expediting this process. All right, so another thing that we're offering that Mamba had mentioned earlier to also expedite the disbursement request process is early data validation. So if a jurisdiction is approaching or is near 50% EOT, you should consider requesting pre-validation of your data. So that will take that chunk that I mentioned about where we go through your disbursement request form. If it's already been pre-cleared, it will really reduce the amount of time it takes for the disbursement request process. And that obviously means that you'll get your money a little bit sooner. So the early validation is going to help identify potential data inaccuracies and other matters on your disbursement request form. And again, it will reduce that overall time it'll take. So to receive pre-validation, it's very easy. Go ahead and download the complete the disbursement request form in the portal. And then, importantly, you'll submit the disbursement request form to the SSBCI inbox. So for early data validation, you should not submit the disbursement request form in the portal. If it's submitted in the portal, it will be treated as if it is an official disbursement submission. So if you want early data validation, please send it to the email SSBCI information inbox, and we will complete pre-validation for you. All right, now getting into the nitty-gritty of the transactions. We have here eligible business purpose. So that's the first thing that should always be asked. It's an eligible business purpose to an eligible borrower. So here we have listed some of the SSBCI eligible purposes and ineligible purposes here. I won't go through all of them, but it's important to take a look, make sure that our transactions are eligible. Okay, so in addition to the business purpose being eligible, we want to make sure there's also no ineligible element in the transaction, such as goodwill, confessions of judgment, or an NCUA or an interest rate that's over that NCUA rate. So those are all going to send up flags for us. and potentially lead to non-compliance. So just make sure that you're aware of that. And also another reminder here is that your application is part of your allocation agreement. And so we will be looking at your application when we are reviewing your transactions to make sure that they are in line. Okay, so let's go into EOT, or sorry, just E and O. So for expended, for transactions to be considered expended, SSBCI funds must be dispersed to a specific eligible borrower or lender as part of a set aside to cover a loan guarantee, collateral deposit, or purchase participation for a specific transaction that has closed. For VC equity transactions, SSBCI funds must be directly invested in a specific business. And so for obligated, SSBCI funds must be committed, pledged, or promised in writing to a lender or borrower, and the loan has not contractually closed. For direct equity investments to be considered obligated, there should be a signed investment agreement, and the funds have not been received by the business. For VC fund investments, funds must be committed, pledged, or promised in writing as a part of a VC fund investment, and the obligation is at the fund level. Okay, so here we're going to get into the provider. So the provider definitions are listed in our reporting guidance, so I won't go into each of the definitions of the provider, but I do want to highlight for the companion loan programs that the provider is the lender whose loan is the source of private capital at risk for the transactions. Also, as an important reminder here, the implementing or contracted entity in these direct investment programs must be the entity to make the equity investments for the approved program. So they should be the provider. And for hybrid programs, the provider is going to be based off the type of hybrid program. So if it's a direct hybrid program, it'll follow the definitions for direct. And if it's a funds hybrid program, it'll follow the definition for funds. Okay, so the loan investment transaction amount for loan participation programs, it's the amount, it's the private capital from the lender plus SSBCI funds. For CAP, loan guarantee and collateral support program, the loan transaction should be the private capital from the lender supported by the CAP reserve account, SSBCI guarantee or collateral deposit. And for both direct and fund investment programs, the investment transaction amount is the private capital investment plus SSBCI funds. And pay specific attention to the note here at the bottom that this should exclude borrower's equity, concurrent private financing, and additional government funds. Again, we have our SSBCI allocated funds. This is also important to make sure that you're using the correct definition for allocated funds and only including SSBCI funds, because we use the SSBCI allocated funds and the loan or investment amount to come up with the PCAR for the transaction, so it's really critical. And so we're going to go into another tab of the disbursement request form, which is administrative costs. So on the administrative costs tab, firstly, the most important thing is to remember that administrative costs should be in line with 2 CFR, and they should be allowable, allocable, and reasonable. One important thing to note for admin costs as it relates to disbursement is that administrative costs may be used to assist jurisdictions in reaching their 80% EOT and should be reported on the disbursement request form. So when reporting admin expenses on this tab, remember that each expense doesn't have to be its own line item. Admin expenses can be reported in aggregate. So for example, you can report per expense type or per month. And remember to maintain documentation for these expenses. And another tab here on the disbursement request form is 170.
Can I just add, I'm sorry for interrupting. Can I add a point on admin costs?
Sure.
Yeah, I think what SSBCI, the capital side, have seen when folks come, some folks coming for the disbursement request, they're either reporting admin on the quarterly report or they're just reporting admin on the disbursement. So often we're reaching out to jurisdictions when we're doing disbursement review because we're seeing some items that are not reconciling. So if you're reporting admin on your quarterly, you should report that admin because it does count towards your 80%. Like Raisa stated, if you are using admin program income to offset any admin costs, please don't report that on the disbursement. But for folks, if you have any questions about the inclusion or reporting admin, please send us an email. We're happy to hop on a call. But like Raisa said, just make sure admin does note that admin is included in your 80%. But if you use program income to cover those admin expenses, you cannot include it in your 80% because that's double counting. So if you have any questions about that, we are happy to jump on the call. Just let us know because we want to make sure you are utilizing all the tools available to get to your 80%. All right, so I'm sorry for interrupting you.
Oh, no problem at all. Thank you. All right, and another tab on our disbursement request form is for 171 transactions for jurisdictions that have VC fund programs. So if jurisdictions use VC 171 fees to pay for these services, then the venture capital fund must certify each year that these services were provided. And of course, these transactions should be reported on the disbursement request form. All right, and then lastly, we have unenrollment. So as far as how unenrollment relates to disbursement request process, there are two areas in which it can come into play. So jurisdictions can identify non-compliant transactions during their own review, and the other is if compliance identifies non-compliant transactions during our review. So what will happen if that occurs is that non-compliant transactions will be removed from the disbursement request form, and an additional sample will be requested. The good news here is that compliance can still process your disbursement request if non-compliance comes up. The only issue is that if that non-compliant transaction or transactions takes the jurisdiction below their 80% required threshold, then the jurisdiction would have to provide additional transactions to bring the jurisdiction back up to the 80% EOT, and then we can continue on with your disbursement request. And that is actually all for me. I'm going to pass it to Hope or potentially Mayma if you have another comment here on this slide.
Thank you, Raisa. I just want to add for admin, what we've done is what we've seen from other jurisdictions, we recommend that other jurisdictions that apply this on their own. When we send out our sample request, some jurisdictions will go through and review some of those transactions that we sample to make sure they're compliant. We recommend that happening prior to our sample request, but we do like the fact that some jurisdictions are reviewing those transactions and identifying potential non-compliant or non-compliant issues early on before they submit their document. That will also help us, like Raisa said, we can remove that transaction. If it is not compliant, if you guys have confirmed it's not compliant, and based on our review, we've confirmed it's not compliant, we can remove that from the disbursement request form early and not wait till we're it's still not going to impact. We still want to make sure that we handle both separately, but just a review of your transaction and some of the terms laid out in that supporting document file that we sent out might help you identify potential non-compliance that you didn't identify earlier. But like we always say, like Raisa said, a quarterly review of your SSBCI supported transaction, making sure you do your own sample at a minimum, have a checklist. I think some outreach managers have discussed that in the past. Have a checklist, go through those checklists and seeing what items may be out of scope with SSBCI compliance. I think that's what I will recommend. So, Raisa, again, thank you for letting me jump in. And I'll turn it over to Hope.
Thank you, Mayma. Please let me know if you can see my screen.
We can see your screen, Hope. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I'll walk us through an example template, and I will input made-up data. So remember, when you get your template, it will be customized to your specific participation jurisdictions programs. What you will see is, as you can see on my tab, you will have a cover page, a tools tip page, and your specific transactions, and your admin cost tab, and your VC fund 171 fees tab. And I'll start with the cover page. For the cover page, as you can notice, you are not able to edit this cover page. This cover page, as you can see, when you come in, your second and second tranche requests will have pre-populated your jurisdiction name, the date of your AA execution, as well as the amount that was already distributed to you or dispersed to you. And if you're coming in for your second tranche, in this line 8, you'll see the second. If you're coming in for your third tranche, you'll see first and second tranche amounts already pre-populated for you. So I'll go on to your EOT section. This is your second section in lines 12 and lines 13. For your line 12, it allows you, like line 12 shows you your expended obligated and transferred EOT amounts. That again, it doesn't include your admin costs and it doesn't include your 171 costs. This is just for your program. So this amount will come in here. And as you have your admin costs, this will be populated automatically as you input them in the tabs I just talked about. And of course, line 15 is just a total of line 12, 13, and 14. On line 17 and line 18, this will show your EOT percentage. So if you're coming in for a second tranche review, you'll need to have expended at least 80% of your first tranche or 80% of your cumulative funds dispersed. So like I mentioned earlier, if you're coming in for a third tranche, you'll need to have EOT 100% of your first tranche and then 80% or more of your second tranche. And as we enter some of this transactions information throughout the rest of the demonstration, we'll come back and look at the cover page so you can see that these numbers will increase from 0 as we input the numbers, and these numbers will increase. In lines 21 and 22, we'll give you information regarding your SETI expenditures. So each jurisdiction has been assigned a SETI objective, which is your goal of what percentage of expended transactions should have been invested in SETI-owned businesses. So that will be listed down here on line 28, your SETI objective. In this case, is 50%. And the cover page will automatically calculate your cumulative expenditures and your SETI expenditures as shown in your percentage expending on those SETI-owned businesses. We recommend that you reference the cover page as often to help you track your SETI objectives, and we highly recommend that you enter all your transaction information as you enroll them into your programs. And I believe Ray's already told you this. It just helps you track your SETI as well as your EOT and just keep you up to date. I'll move on to the Tooltip tab. So the Tooltip tab, it shows for each data element in the disbursement request form. Here, this is available to explain what we are looking for and what is being calculated. You can read this tooltip by hovering over the column header for each one, as I did here on the cover page. If I hover over this one, it'll show me what we are looking for you to enter into these columns. And then in your Tooltip tab, you'll see your data element. And then you'll see the data element, where the data element is located on what page in this tab is located. And you also see whether or not it has a drop-down menu. And then you have a tooltip description. This will show you exactly what we're looking for you to enter into specific columns. I'll go ahead and complete an example from one loan credit transaction. And remember, the transaction tabs are broken up per program type. In this case, loan credit transaction will be for loan guarantee, loan participation, and collateral support transactions. For your CAP transaction, you'll be the capital access program transaction. And then for the VC equity tab is your VC fund and direct equity programs. This is just an example. So if you don't have loan credit programs, then you'll have to leave this tab completely blank and you can skip over it. And the same goes for the other program types that your jurisdiction does not have. But for the purposes of this presentation, we'll go over the loan credit transaction tab. In the first column, you have your approved program name, right? So in here, we do have a drop-down menu, and these are the names of your approved programs as it is specified in your allocation agreements. If your program type that is compatible with this tab is not here, please reach out to us, and then we can update this tab for you. In our example, I'll choose the collateral program support, and as you can see, the program type automatically populates. The name of your like I said, if the name of your program is incorrect or the program type is incorrect, please reach out to us and we'll update this. In column C, if you have a loan participation program, we want you to indicate whether it's a purchase participation or companion loan. If you have a loan guarantee program or collateral support program, please leave column C blank. In column D is the name of your provider. On here, we're asking you to put in the legal name of the provider. And also we're asking you to make sure that the provider names that you're putting in here are the same ones that have been approved in your application. In my instance, I'm using RISA LLC. And I'll make sure that my application has RISA LLC as one of the providers. And then I'll make sure that the name in here matches what's in the application documents. For the unique transaction ID, we don't have a prescribed form for this. You can choose either alphanumeric numbers or a combination of both. It's how you want it to be. In my case, I'll just say 1, 2, 3, 4, 8. In your column F is the expended, obligated, and transfer status. So column G is expended, obligated, and transfer date. So these two go together. Depending on the stage of your loan investment, please indicate if this transaction is expended, obligated, or transferred using the drop-down selection in column F. So in this case, I'm going to pick expended for a transaction. And then the obligated transfer date, I'm going to use today's date. And make sure that your expended and obligated transfer date, it cannot be earlier than your allocation agreement date. For your business name, again, we're asking you to make sure that this is the legal business name as it appears either in your loan documentation or in the company's incorporation documentation. And in my case, I'm going to put Asthma Pilots LLC. For your business EIN, this needs to be a 9-digit number. If I, for some reason, put in a wrong, numbers that are not 9 digits, you get an error. So this is just to remind you that it needs to be a 9-digit number, and then you put in there 9 digits. If this individual is a person and not a business, please don't put this social security here. Just put in SSN. Do not include any personal PII in this form or social security numbers. For the business state and business zip code, enter where the business is located. One of the issues that we do see is that for the business state, what we're seeing, what's being input in the DRF doesn't match what's in your loan agreements or your loan documentation. So just ensure that the business state and business code, they actually match what's in the loan application and your loan documentations. In my case, I'm putting in Virginia. And again, it's only have to input a 5-digit zip code. We don't need all that, the rest of the numbers that appear on that. For the primary purpose of the loan, we do have a drop-down menu. So you can pick from any of these selections that we have on here. And in my case, I'm going to put acquire inventory because they're going to buy some airplanes for asthma. And then for the purpose of the loan, you can leave this for the purpose of the loan or eligible use, you can leave this blank. The only time you have to fill this out is if you pick here in column LM, other eligible use, and you can see an alert comes up, and then you have to input something there, and then it goes away. So going back again, I'm going to go back to my original purpose on here to acquire inventory. For the secondary purpose, you can put the secondary purpose if you have to. One of the things that I want to highlight here, if the primary purpose is to refinance the loan, we need you to input the original loan purpose. In other words, you cannot put refinance in primary purpose, but you can put refinance as a secondary purpose. If I'm refinancing a loan that was used to acquire inventory, I would put inventory here, and I will put refinance as a secondary purpose. Sorry, in column O. So for column P and Q, these are very important two columns for a disbursement request form. This is the loan transaction amount and the SSBCI allocated funds. So here, you enter the appropriate values in each column. So for my purposes, this is the total loan amount. I'm going to say $500,000, 500,000, and the SSBCI allocated funds for that went into the deal was $150,000. If for some reason you have any additional government funding or any state funds that went into the deal, this is where you would input that value for the additional government funds. For the full-time equivalent employees, I will say that one of the issues that we've been having with the full-time equivalent employees is if you have part-time employees, we require you to read the policies of how you come up with what a full-time equivalent employee would be. So in our case, I'm going to say that 7 employees when they came in, and because there's 7 employees that came in, this qualifies as a VSB, a very small business. Remember, a very small business has less than 10 employees. This is another line item that I'd like to highlight. A very small business has 10 employees or less than 10 employees. In other words, it has to be 9 or less. So for our purposes, this is yes, it's a very small business. And then for SETI owned, this is another item that I would like to highlight. What we've been finding out for SETI owned businesses, if you enter no, it's not a SETI owned business, there's nothing else for you to do here. But if you enter that yes, it's a SETI owned businesses, you need to pick from a drop-down menu, like what category of SETI owned businesses is this business. In my case, I'm going to say SETI status by business address that is located in the CDFI area. Please note that there's a CDFI area map. If you're not sure, just input the zip code into that map and it will tell you whether or not that area is SETI owned or business. And if not, you can always have the individual certify that. Speaking of certifications, one of the other items I'd like to highlight is that we have been finding out that some certifications don't, number one, include the standardized certification language as required by national standards. So number one, make sure that the language in your certifications is compatible with what SSBCI requires. And number two, make sure that the certifications are being obtained prior to closing the loan or at the closing date. Because for some reason, these steps are being missed by some jurisdictions. So ensure that again, your certification language is compatible with what's in the national standards, number one, and number two, your certifications are received or you obtain them timely. So for everything else on this tab is going to be exactly the same for your CAP transactions and your VC equity transactions. So I'm going to walk you through a couple of differences between what your loan credit and VC equity transactions have. And I took the liberty to highlight what some of the things that will be the same. And in this case, your unique ID, your providers, your EOT date will be the same as what we just talked about. But for the VC equity transactions, if you're reporting an obligation for an equity fund program, you don't need to enter much of that information. Again, you only need to enter your EOT obligation, a unique transaction amount, the name of the fund, and the date those funds were obligated. The remaining information can be left blank and besides your investment amount. And I'm sure Carl will walk us through over this in more detail during the VC fund workbook walkthrough. For your CAP transactions, again, CAP transactions, like I said, your CAP transactions disbursement date, the difference here is that all are expanded transactions that you'll be reporting. So you may want to use the date the funds were actually wired as the disbursement date. I'm moving on to column N and O. For column N and O, in cap transactions, for instance, if I say this transaction was for $30,000, we require you, the SSBCI allocated funds can only be 2 to 7% of the total transaction amount. So for instance, if I enter here $100, because $100 is less than 2% of the 30,000, I'll get an error. So let's say then I go back and I enter, let's say $10,000. Again, I'll get an error because $10,000 is over the 7% that's allowable. So in this instance, I'm just going to put $650 as our SSBCI amount. So the last two columns on here are specific, the total borrower premium and the total lender premiums. These are specific to cap transactions only. So in my case, I'll just say, let's say it was $10 here and it was $460. Moving on to the administrative costs tab. Again, for the admin costs on this tab, this can be used towards the EOT threshold unless they are paid for using your program income. So make sure that whenever you recording your admin costs, they're not part of your program income. So again, here you enter the transaction date. Let's say it happened today. And then you also want to enter what was the expense for. I can just say legal costs. And we do require you to let us know whether or not was this for a VC fund or was this expense a yes or no. In my case, it wasn't. And then also need to know, was it a direct or indirect cost? And I'm going to say it was a direct cost. And then we'll need to know the exact amount for that. In my case, I'll say $10,000. For the VC fund service portfolio fees, this is just for those programs that have 171 fees, and this will only be relevant for equity capital funds type programs or hybrid program that's acting as a fund type. If you don't have any of those programs, leave it blank. And here we do require that you select your program name. Again, you make sure that your provider, like we talked about, is the provider that's been approved by your program, and it should be in your application, and then how much you pay for that. So one thing I do want to point out here, coming back to the loan credit transactions, as we talk about full-time employees, and I wanted to really stress on this. Let's say, for instance, Asma comes back and we give her another loan, another transaction for a different purpose, which is allowable. And this time around, Asma comes in and Asma has 15 employees. We cannot put 15 employees here. And the reason why is because we're double counting the initial 7 employees. So for our purposes, when Asma comes back, we have to input 8 employees, which then is the sum of the 7 plus the 8. So we only have to put in the delta, right? So when we come back on this, is Asma still, we have to determine whether or not is Asma still a very small business for our purposes, because Asma in totality has 15 employees. She can no longer be a small business. So sometimes you will look at this and you'll see 8, and like I just told you, it has to be 9 or less, right, to be a VSB. But in this instance, because it's the same business that's come in twice, so you'll see this discrepancy. So make sure that you're reviewing this for any businesses that you're providing multiple loans to. So I'll go back to the cover page as I promised. As you can see, the numbers that were 0 or blank have been automatically populated. You're at 0.85% EOT'd, and your SETI expended is already populated, and your total funds expended for SETI business is already at 99.57%. Again, recommend that you figure out your cadence, but we recommend that maybe on a weekly, monthly basis, or as your transactions are being completed, you complete this and you periodically visit this page to figure out, number one, are you reaching your SETI? Are you reaching your EOT? And you can come in, like Raisa mentioned before, if you're at 50% or higher, coming for pre-validation. And then if you're saying that, hey, some of the businesses that I'm doing, I'm not hitting my SETI, this will help you figure out where you are on that and then review your population to see what you can do. So as a reminder, when you come in for a third tranche request, the template will be pre-populated, like I said, with all your transactions that were provided during the second tranche review. All you have to do is scroll down to the next available line and start entering the remaining transactions that your program has supported and that you'll be using during your third tranche review. A couple things again that I want to highlight before I conclude this presentation. Ensure that all your certifications have the required certification language, but as by the national standards guidelines. You also make sure that you're collecting the certifications at or prior to the transaction close date. Make sure that you're correctly identifying your VSB transactions in the example that I just gave, the 7 versus the 8. And make sure that you're correctly identifying the SETI-owned businesses. This will help you meet your SETI objectives. And one last thing that I want to make sure, ensure that your reported quarterly expanded transactions are reconciled to your DRF. In my example that I gave here, let's say, for instance, right, this came in January 26th. When you're reporting your quarterly transactions for Q1, I should see this amount is expanded. And if you happen to come in June, I want to make sure that what you reported in your quarterly reports is the 500 and the 150 is what I'm seeing in the DRF. We've been seeing discrepancies for similar transactions or same transaction with one amount in the DRF and one amount in the quarterly reports. So before you send in your DRF, make sure that you're performing that reconciliation on your end, and will save us time on the back and forth and help us expedite your disbursement requests. So with this, I conclude the demo of this disbursement request. Do you have any questions for me?
Looks like someone is raising their hand, Hope.
Yeah, I have a quick question. Thank you so much for this presentation. It was really informative. I like going through the form. My question is, if we there's these these three different categories: expended, obligated, and transferred, and it's kind of like a moment in time if it's going to be in either one of those. Would we update it and say, oh, now this is obligated, or would we just report it as expended, obligated, or transferred, and then we wouldn't? I'm just wondering how we report on this as that status changes over time. Would we put in a new row, or would we just change the status in that column? What is the expectation for that?
So for your expanded, right? So what I usually say for your expanded, if you're already a wire transfer and the money has left the building, so to speak, and the transaction has already gone to the business or gone to the provider, it's expanded. If it's obligated, you have a commitment, right? You're committing, and you have a commitment agreement. You're committing to say, hey, if we will send this money to a specific business, or we're committed to a specific transaction, that will be obligated. And what normally happens, especially with the VC fund, and I'll speak about VC fund equities, if the amounts are obligated, and let's say you obligated 20,000, right? And you spent 10,000. So your sum of your obligated and your sum of your expended should be 20,000. So you can't still have 20 obligated if you already sent out 10,000, right? So make sure that you're doing that math internally so you're not double counting. So you expended, your EOT, your transfer should really be the total of what was sent to you. So it should never be over what was dispersed to you. Does that make sense?
That's correct. Yes. So Hope Point's 100% correct. She's saying that if you are at the time you're reporting, if you have that, like she's saying, the funds went out to your provider, that's an expanded. If at the time you're reporting, it's only you have a commitment letter from your provider, that is obligated. Generally for transfer, I'll put that in the chat, it has to be for immediate need to cover expenses, admin, or for a cost of a loan. So normally we don't, like in a VC transaction, we may not see a lot of transfers. And just for everyone, if you do report transfer, SSBCI will ask you, is it for immediate need to cover expenses? And do you have an invoice to support these expenses that are being covered? So to Hope's point is, you're going to report at the time of what you know. So if you have the funds going out to your provider, that's an expanded transaction. If it's just a commitment and it's some other contingencies that you need to clarify, that is a commitment. But you do have an opportunity to exchange those. So if you're coming for your tranche 2, and it's obligated, you can change it in tranche 3 and label it as suspended because those funds have gone out. But just jump in let me know if I answer your question.
Okay. So this is kind of like a running list of transactions, and if they change from tranche 2 to tranche 3, then we'll just reflect it at that point in time.
Correct. And that amount,
that helps.
It might change. Yeah, it might change. Like you might have committed 50 million. I mean, no, not 50 million, but that's not allowed. Like 5 million, but that may have changed. You may have sent less to your provider. So those are the things that we're talking about. So you're not a fund, so you cannot commit 50 million. Anyone else? Please jump in. You don't have to just come off mute.
I mean, this is Jared Dunlap. I represent multiple Minnesota Chippewa Tribe bands. I had a question. If there was a lower amount left in any of the tranches, they had met 80% of the tranche, say first tranche, but there was like a nominal amount left, like $20,000, $15,000, and there wasn't either a tribal member or a tribal enterprise that utilized that little of amount. What could be a scenario for, do we just wait for the next tranche and then take from that remaining in tranche 1 to then use up 100% of that tranche 1? Is that a valid example?
That's correct. So when you come in for tranche 3, like Hope said, we're looking at you as to be 100% EOT. So you don't have to EOT 100% of tranche 1 in tranche 2. When you come in, you get 80%, but that remaining 20%, we wanted to see it EOT in tranche for your third tranche request.
And then further question about obligated. I think it was passed over pretty quick, at least for me. But if working with a client and we know there's a process, timeline, but we understand they want to take out a certain amount, is that obligated, or is that just it hasn't entered into obligation because you're not working with the lead lender at that point? Can I get further help on that?
You can only report obligation when you have a signed commitment and executed commitment, like Raisa highlighted in the previous slide. So it can only be obligated that you have a commitment to execute on that deal, whether it's a transaction of credit transaction or a VC transaction. So you have to have a signed commitment, a signed commitment letter from the VC fund, or a signed commitment from the lender supporting that transaction with private capital.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
And then please, any other SMEs, my compliance team, please jump in if I'm misspeaking. And outreach, please jump in if I'm misspeaking on anything. Tara, I think your hands are up, or your hand is up.
It is, yes. Thanks so much. Okay, so not to beat a dead horse on this OET, EOT acronym, but I do have a question. I could totally share my screen because it's like hands-on. We're in this form, and you mentioned on this obligated, because when I'm in my tab, and I'm happy to share my screen if you want me to. If not, I can just say when I'm in my VC. So just just for some little background, I represent Navajo CDFI. We're the implementing entity for a tribal consortium, and our tribal consortium is only doing venture capital. We have invested into a venture capital fund, which is matching at that fund-to-fund level, the one-to-one obligation. We have expended 2 transactions through the fund. However, at the implementing level, we have obligated and transferred into that venture capital fund additional funds in our capital calls. So that's where it gets to the obligated part. And somebody earlier had mentioned that's where we're having issues, where I was like, well, crap, on the, excuse my French, on the tab, VC equity OCSP transactions tab, right? It asks for a lot of information. But if I've only obligated over the money to the venture capital fund as the LP investment through the capital call, then am I really just putting in the approved program name, the provider, the amount obligated through that limited partner capital call? And then that, because I guess that's where I was confused of like, okay, I see the expended, but I've obligated a lot more. It's been, I mean, it's gone out the door into the LP through the capital call. It just doesn't seem like the right tab. You know, it's asking for so much information that's not there.
Yeah, I think this is
So-
what Raisha mentioned yesterday. Tada, your question can actually be answered in a couple of minutes once we get called to demo the VC fund worksheet. He will illustrate that amount,
Okay.
any amount that you've already expanded to a portfolio company, your obligation to the fund. So once we get there in the next couple of minutes, he will illustrate that for you.
Okay, awesome. Then I'll just wait. Thank you so much.
Awesome.
Thank you.
And then
Jerry,
Tada,
your hands are
just to
still
make,
up. I just want to make sure. Go ahead, Hope. I just want to make sure
yeah, I was
Jerry's
gonna say,
okay.
Tada,
His hands are still
yes, I was gonna say just to make sure when Carl walks you through that, you also find that whatever you're entering in this tab will match your worksheet. So that's another check you have to do. But when Carl walks you through it, it will make sense to you at that
Great.
point.
I was definitely
Thank
like,
you.
no, we're not there. We're at 57%, and we should be at a lot more. So, great. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, we got our good guy Carl on the line that will demo that in a few minutes.
Well, hey, Carl, I know you, so thank you for helping me get to this next level because we're there. Thank you.
Thank you. Karen, I
And
just want to
Tada,
make sure if you have any
did you say
questions.
you're at 57%?
Well, we're 50%, 57% on actually expended. When it comes to obligated, we're at over 80%. And theoretically, I was going to ask you about that because we have an issue where
Yes.
what we've called, what is actually being called is beyond what we have in our tranche. So now I've got this situation of, well, I'm at 100% obligated, but how do I do that if it's, as you mentioned, what I really need to transfer is more than what we have, which is why now we need the second tranche. So I'm not sure how you want me to deal with that on the paperwork. And I'm waiting for Carl to tell me how to break it down. Thank you.
Yes, Carl will walk you through that. And we recommend you coming for pre-validation, like Raisa said, so that will help you too.
Great. I appreciate that
Yes.
as well. Thank you.
And you don't have to share screen today, but we are also available because we want to make sure folks, we maximize the time for this training. We are available for a meeting, so please send us a meeting in our inbox, and we will schedule time with our SMEs, our outreach team to make sure you have what you need before you submit, like Hope said, for your pre-data validation.
Perfect. Thank you.
Do we have
I'm
any
turning
more
back over to
questions?
Hope.
Thank you, ma'am. If there are no additional questions, I'll hand it back to Raisa. Thank you all.
A quick question about the premiums. I don't know that I saw that. Is that something new or for the loan credit, or is it just for cap transactions?
It's only for cap
Okay,
transactions, and
so that.
yes, it's not new, but it's only for cap
Yep,
transactions,
that's why.
yep.
Great,
Okay.
I appreciate it.
Hello, quick question about administrative costs. For example, if we have a sizable statement of work, which is an obligation, it is for overtime. So at the time that we come in for a third tranche, we would not have fully expended that obligation. We can still include the entire amount on this disbursement template. Is that correct?
Cheryl, we are happy to take this offline, but I think our first point of reference is for you to refer to 2CFR to see how they would look at an administrative cost that's not an actual cost, but an projected cost. But we can talk offline if you need, maybe go through the specifics to make sure we understand with our compliance, our risk team, and our subject matter experts. But generally, we just want to remind everybody that admin is capped at 533. So whatever you are projecting cannot exceed those amounts per your allocation.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Hope we turn it to Raisa.
Yes, we're turning to Raisa, and thank you all for your questions.
Raisa, the floor is yours.
Thank you. All right, so in the interest of time and getting to the main event, which is Carl's VC Fund worksheet, I'm going to go ahead and run through these really, really quickly. A lot of them, the good news is, are really resources for you guys that we've put together, so you guys can just look back at these as you're completing your disbursement request form. So here are the template validations that we're going to be looking at. So just go ahead and look through these as you're looking at your transactions and know that this is what we're looking for. Here we have some disbursement information, and these have been compiled from what we've previously seen. So again, it might be maybe clear to you, but it's not necessarily something that it's something that we've seen often. So we just want to make sure we really highlight it for folks and make sure that everyone knows these bits of information. Same for here, study categories. The main highlight here and takeaway is that a certification is required for categories 1 through 3, but category 4 does not require self-certification. It is just documentation that the current business address is located in the CDFI area. Okay, and these are template reminders that will be really helpful for you all as you complete your disbursement request form, many of which Hope has already gone through, but again, this is a resource for you. Go ahead and look back at these and just kind of tidying up your disbursement request form before you come in for your official submission. These are some important information specifically for loan and credit programs that we've seen, particularly the refinancing, just making sure that refinancing is not the primary purpose for any loan or investment, and it is just the secondary business purpose. So that primary purpose is going to be the underlying business purpose of the underlying loan. And here's important tidbits for equity VC programs. Really encourage you, if you have VC fund programs or direct equity programs, to look over the slide. Like I said, this is stuff that we've seen, so just making sure you don't fall into some of the stuff that we've seen in the past. And again, holding up your disbursement request, just review this and make sure that you've got all this squared away. The supporting document reference file that Mayma had mentioned earlier is also a really important resource. Here's some more information about how that came about and how it can be helpful for you. A lot of times folks ask if they can get their hands on it. So here's the information that you're going to be receiving, that supporting document reference file, when you receive your sample selection email that was mentioned earlier on the timeline slide. Here is something really important too for what the supporting documentation is. I want to highlight here is some of the documentation that we're going to be asking for. And on that documentation, here's what we're going to be looking for. So just make sure that this is the main thing here. If we're looking for this information, generally we find it here. But if we're not able to find this information here, make sure that you have documentation that will allow us to find this information, because again, that would require that back and forth with the jurisdiction. So just make sure that you're looking at these, this slide and the next 2 slides or next 3 slides, and make sure that your documentation that you're providing for the transactions does have all this necessary information that we're going to be looking to confirm on your disbursement request form. So this is for loan or credit, this is for equity transactions, and this is for cap transactions. And this is for EPCOC transactions specifically. Sometimes these can get complicated. There's a lot of documentation. So go ahead and review this if you have EPCOC transactions on your disbursement request form. And the best practices here that we have highlighted. Most important thing that I'll say here is sometimes another holdup in the disbursement request process can be that the secure file transfer method has not been identified or tested prior to the disbursement request. So just make sure that you're figuring out the secure file transfer method that you're able to use during the disbursement request process prior to actually needing it, because again, sometimes that can lead to another back and forth and again, delay the process. And the finish line, once we finish up the disbursement request process, you're going to receive a closeout email from our team. Once we have that closeout email sent, that means we've sent it on to the next part of this process, and it's going to begin the funding process. And something else that I think is really important for folks to know is that if you've gone through your second tranche disbursement request, any lessons that you've learned there, anything that we've highlighted in the back and forth there, just make sure that you're also applying that to your third tranche, because again, that would make the third tranche request go smoother. So when you're coming in for your third tranche, just go back and review your second tranche emails and such, and just make sure that all that stuff that has been addressed already is addressed in your third tranche. Okay, that is all. I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Carl. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. Carl Fuchs here. I'm going to be covering the VC fund worksheet. And I got to find my screen here. Well, for some reason, I'm not set up to share on this system. So, Raisa, can you share the file that I had prepared originally?
Sure, I'll share it now.
Thanks. Okay, so can you zoom in a little bit, make it easier to see? Okay, as Mema mentioned in the beginning, this is one of the tools that is available to the jurisdictions to help them prepare for their disbursement request. And this is specifically to capture information in a VC fund program. So if you're a jurisdiction without a VC fund program, perhaps you don't need to attend this part of the training, but this has become a pretty important part of reporting for VC fund programs. So if we scroll to the right and down a bit, the real purpose of this worksheet on the left side is really to get to the information on the right side here. And this information on the right side, as the question and answer period last discussion highlighted, this will allow you to enter the obligated and expended transactions for a VC fund program into the worksheet, the disbursement worksheet. So as you can see here, you're going to be reporting the investment fund obligations, which are the remaining amounts that are unexpended, but you will also then report all the expended transactions for each of the investments made by the fund and for any of the admin expenses paid to the fund, or further down, any of the 171 services paid to the fund. Because we need to also account for all the expenditures made under this obligation. So the total amount you'll get credit for, it will include the obligated amount and the expended amount, and those will never exceed the amount of your total commitment to the fund. And the reason for this is part of the disbursement request is not just to get to 80%, but the compliance team has to review each of your transactions and make sure they're compliant in order to include them in the 80%. So let's go back to the left side. And what I have here is a series of examples that look at various types of fund commitments that jurisdictions have made and give you some advice on how to input and track those over time for your specific fund commitments. So there's 4 sections. We'll start with section 1, which captures the fund level information. So you'll have the name of your VC fund program at the top, the date of your commitment to the fund. You'll have the name of the investment fund inside of section 1, starting in line 3. And then line 4, D4, you will put in the total amount of capital in the fund. And then in C5, you'll put the total amount of your allocated funds committed to that fund. And in this case, we have a very simple fund. PJ was in the first close. There's only one jurisdiction participating. There are no ineligible investments, no investment restrictions, no non-allocated jurisdiction funds being used. So all these items in lines 6 through 14 are all blank. And so we're left with 5 million of SSBCI funds committed against 20 million of private capital commitments for, again, a total fund size of 25 million. And that's what we started with. Very simple. You are 20% of the fund. And if these conditions hold over time, we would expect every transaction you participate in, you would be 20% of those transactions. Because that's how VC funds work. They're a pooled capital fund. You participate at the rate of your participation. So that's what we're trying to determine here through this section 1. So what's the total size of the fund? What's the SSBCI allocated amounts? And what is your pro rata? And so scrolling down now to section 2, you'd enter in all the expended portfolio investments the fund made up until the date of your disbursement request. And we would expect that, again, you would participate at 20% of each of the fund's investments. So column C here, VC fund investment, is the total amount the VC fund invested in the portfolio company. The next column over D, 100,000, that's the share of SSBCI in the 500,000, and that represents 20%. And then there may be other private capital investors other than the fund investing in the company at the same time. And that, if you add that to the 500,000, that gives you the 700,000 total investment amount, which is entered into as the investment transaction in the disbursement worksheet. So for disbursement worksheets, we would look at the transaction amount and then the SSBCI allocated funds. But this allows us to keep track of what your participation rate was in each of the underlying expended transactions of the fund. And as we look at the next examples going forward, you'll see why that becomes important. Then scrolling down, same principles apply to any admin expenses paid to the fund. So 75,000 represents the total amount of administrative costs. And these were paid by the LPs of the fund. SSBCI accounted for 20% of the LP capital, so they paid 20% of that 75,000. And similarly for fees, this is the 171 services to portfolio companies. And again, this gets reported separately in the disbursement worksheet. So we're breaking it out. Total fees paid were 500,000 by the fund. This represents roughly 2% of the $25 million fund, and 100,000 was the SSBCI allocated capital share of that 500,000, representing 20%. So scrolling down. So this allows us now to be able to determine what's highlighted at the bottom there. What is the remaining unexpended amount? So we start out with the original balances of 25 million and 5 million respectively for the total fund and for SSBCI. Then we take out all the funds that have been expended for various reasons. So program funds expended are for portfolio company investments. The administrative costs were the administrative costs paid to the fund, and 171 were the fees paid. And so you can see everything tracks at 20%. And again, if we scroll to the right side of the uh, worksheet again, this is really what the purpose is. It allows us to enter those numbers correctly into your disbursement worksheet. So just realize that this worksheet isn't linked to the disbursement worksheet, so you need to copy these numbers over to the disbursement worksheet to submit it. This is just a tool to help you be able to determine what the correct amount of obligated funds are. Because in no instance do we want you to report more than $5 million obligated or expended to this fund, right? That's the total amount of your commitment. You shouldn't report 5 million as obligated and then report all the expended transactions separately. That would total more than 5 million, and that would be incorrect. Right, I'll stop here. This is the simplest of the examples. So if there are any questions now on just the mechanics and purpose of this worksheet, happy to take them now. Okay.
Carl, this is Tom Halvin from New York. Just quick question on section 1. Some of the inputs that weren't added for this example. Is there anywhere where there's some definitions just to kind of get some clarification? Because I guess some of those inputs were not part of the older iteration of this form. So we're just trying to get some clarification.
Yeah, so let me walk through the other examples. I'll take each of these lines one by one and add them in, and then you'll see what's going on. All right, so let's go to example 2 then. So example 2 this is a second close scenario. So when the jurisdiction invested, the fund had an existing portfolio of investments that they made out of their first close capital. And because first close capital, there had not been any SSBCI participation, these are considered conflicted investments, and SSBCI cannot support this portfolio. So we call these ineligible investments. These are investments that the SSBCI Capital will not participate in, nor will they participate in any follow-on investments in this portfolio. So in this case, there was 5 million of those portfolio investments. So that reduced the total available private capital to 15 million. So if you recall the previous example, there was 20 million of private capital for a total fund size of 25. But here, the target fund size has been reduced to 20 million because 5 million is no longer part of the SSBCI reported fund. And that's one point I want to make is once we get into this entering data into each of these line items for various purposes, we'll see the total fund size and the target fund size diverge. And this has caused a bit of confusion, but this is for SSBCI reporting purposes because you cannot report that you've supported any conflicted investments. Those would be non-compliant. So we want to take all those out. From the fund's perspective, they still have a $25 million fund. You still have a $5 million commitment. It's just for reporting purposes, it's a $20 million fund. You'll participate in 25% of any investments the fund makes instead of 20% because you will never participate in those $5 million transactions. So if you go down here again, all the expenditures are now at 25%. So if you see the original VC fund investment was 500,000 in the previous example, now it's 400,000. Fund's a little smaller, transaction size a little smaller. SSBCI participation is 100,000 stayed the same, but the participation rate increased to 25. And it would be the same thing for admin costs and for services to portfolio companies. Scrolling down. So then we get a different remaining unexpended amount of SSBCI allocated and private capital. And that when we move to the right side of the worksheet, those numbers are reflected there. And again, I didn't mention the first time around, but this is a VC transaction, this obligated amount. And so we do need to see private capital associated with the SSBCI obligation. So that's why we're diligent in trying to determine what is the correct amount of the remaining unexpended obligation. Because again, we don't want to have the totals be more than your total commitment to this fund, because that would be double counting. All right, we got to move along quickly here. So example 3, please. So example 3 is an example where there are 2 jurisdictions now participating in the fund. They both participated during the first close of the fund. However, one jurisdiction has determined it would participate with a 1-to-1 contracted rate. It has determined that the only available investment portfolio available to it is to participate in its jurisdiction. For every dollar that the fund invests, they must invest an equal amount of SSBCI. So in that case, the total available private capital now is reduced to 10 million because we start with 25 million, we take out the SSBCI obligation of 5, and then we must take out the 10 million of combined other jurisdiction and the matching private capital. That leaves us with 10. So the total fund size is now $15 million, 10 million of private, 5 million of SSBCI. So while your SSBCI commitment amount has stayed the same, because of these permutations in the matching capital, your participation rate now is at 33.3%. It's higher. And again, all the underlying transactions should reflect that, including admin and fees. And then the underlying remaining unexpended and unexpended obligation amount is calculated, which then allows you to report correctly. So just one final thing on this example, but it applies to all of them. Part of this tool is also to help you prepare the documentation necessary to work with the compliance team as they sample your transactions. So be aware that any number you enter into this worksheet, you should be confident that you have a supporting document somewhere that evidences that number. So, for the VC fund investment in the portfolio company, there should be an investment agreement. There should be a wire transaction to show that the fund wired funds to that company, et cetera, et cetera. The examples of the supporting documentation that was provided earlier. But this helps you identify, okay, if I have a complete file, then each of these line items will have their supporting documentation. And if sampled, I can pull them quickly and deliver them. Okay, example 4. So example 4, we've talked with some of your compatriots around the country about how to structure their participation in funds. As I mentioned earlier, some have chosen to do a contracted rate because they're focusing their capital only on their jurisdiction. And so they're not, allowing the fund to invest their capital outside of their jurisdiction. So here we have a case where, as we talked in the previous example, there's 5 million of another jurisdiction's funds in here, and that's matched with 5 million of the private capital because they have to be 1-to-1 in the deals they do. But in addition, the fund has determined that it wants to reserve 5 million of its private capital to do non-eligible SSBCI transactions. Maybe they want to invest in transactions larger than 20 million, whatever it may be. But what happens is now we net out the 15 million, the 555, including the 5 original jurisdictions capital. So now the available private capital has been reduced to 5 million, and the target fund size is now 10 million, and you're at 50%. So here you need to be very careful that you always maintain this 50% because that is, again, a compliance requirement. There has to be at least 1-to-1 capital at the fund level, can never dip below that. And so a contracted rate would ensure that the fund invests your money, $1 of SSBCI for $1 of private capital. And again, the underlying transactions reflect all that. And we net out all the expended amounts from the original commitment amounts, and that gives us the unexpended obligated, which allows us to report correctly on the disbursement worksheet. So I have one last example, example 5. So this was a case, was mentioned earlier that if you're using program income, for example, to pay for administrative costs, those transactions are not reported on the disbursement worksheet because they are not allocated funds. They don't count to your 80%. So this is an example of a jurisdiction has decided to use program income to pay for fund admin expenses and potentially maybe any fees that exceed the 17.1% cap. And so the way this worksheet works is by using this percentage amount, entering a percentage, we preserve the pro rata relationship between SSBCI and the private capital. So if you recall the first example, which was the unrestricted, it was a $25 million fund, a $25 million target fund. That was a 20% pro rata participation. What's really happening here is the jurisdiction is maintaining its pro rata in all fund transactions. It's just some transactions are going to be paid out of program income and not allocated funds. And again, those are going to be largely admin, perhaps excess 171. So if we scroll down to admin, what you'll see here is there is no reporting of admin expenses because, again, it's paid for with program income. So while there were actual admin expenses paid, the VC fund did have them. They're not reported for this disbursement worksheet purposes. They're not a use of allocated funds. They don't count to the 80%. So that's just a few examples of all the different permutations in practice. Each of the funds we've seen have very specific circumstances that you're going to have to address. So if you can scroll up, to the top. Oop. We got out of there. But anyway, we are available and have spoken not only with the program managers of these VC fund programs, but also with fund managers. It's very important for you to get on the same page with your fund manager so they can understand what your reporting needs are and they can prepare data and deliver to you the documentation that support this reporting. Generally, once I think the funds understand what the purpose of this type of reporting is, they're very supportive and are happy to help you be efficient in your reporting and document collection. So I'll close there. Any